Today, we are diving headfirst into one of history's strangest, most enduring royal conspiracies. It's a story that asks a pretty wild question about one of England's most legendary rulers, Queen Elizabeth I. You hear that name and you think power, intelligence, England's golden age. But for centuries, there's been this whispered story, a rumor that suggests the iconic queen wasn't who she said she was. And it all comes down to this one unbelievable question. Was the famous Virgin Queen actually a man?
I mean, just look at her. Elizabeth I created one of the most powerful public images in all of history. She projected this aura of untouchable authority, of pure mystery. She was a total master of political theater. But what if that whole look wasn't just about royal branding? What if it was really the most elaborate disguise ever?
Okay, so where in the world did a story this crazy even begin? Well, it starts as this weird little piece of local folklore that then gets a massive signal boost from a very, very famous writer. That's right. This whole thing wasn't dug up from some dusty royal archive. Nope. It was shot into the mainstream in a 1910 book by the master of horror himself, the creator of Dracula, Bram Stoker. But Stoker didn't just make this up out of thin air. He apparently stumbled upon the story while he was visiting this little English village called Bisley. He saw that for their May Day festival, they did something strange. They dressed a local boy, not a girl, in Elizabethan clothes and crowned him the May Queen. And when Stoker asked why, the locals told him this legend that had been floating around their village for centuries.
And here's the story they told him. So the legend goes that around 1543, a young Princess Elizabeth was shipped off to Bisley to hide out from the plague. But while she was there, she suddenly got sick and died. Her guardians, you can imagine, were absolutely terrified. I mean, how do you tell the notoriously short-tempered King Henry VIII that you lost his daughter? So in a total panic, they scrambled to find a look-alike, but they couldn't find a girl. What they did find was a local red-haired boy. They dressed him up, passed him off as the princess, and incredibly, the king was completely fooled. And just like that, the deception was locked in for a lifetime.
Now, for a story that wild to stick around, it needs some evidence, right? And over the years, believers have pieced together a case from this trail of circumstantial clues. So let's take a look at the so-called proof. So first, you've got her iconic look. Theorists will tell you that the heavy white makeup wasn't about fashion. It was to hide a 5 o'clock shadow. Those super high, elaborate collars, the perfect way to hide an Adam's apple. And all the wigs, well, that was to cover up male pattern baldness. They argue this wasn't royal style, it was camouflage.
Then there's her famous title, the Virgin Queen. Now, historians see this as a brilliant political move. But if you believe the theory, it was a practical necessity. Of course, she could never marry or have kids, they say. Any husband, or even a doctor examining her for childbirth, would have discovered the secret immediately.
And then you have this collection of other kind of suspicious details. Her obsession with privacy. Her flat-out refusal to be examined by most doctors, even when she was really sick. And maybe the biggest one, her strict order that no autopsy, no post-mortem be performed on her body when she died. You add all that to the fact that the two guardians from the legend were rewarded handsomely and stayed by her side her entire life, and you can see how the pieces start to seem like they fit. It's a really tempting theory, but does it actually hold any water?
Well, this is where the story takes a sharp turn, because this is where the whole thing just completely falls apart when you hold it up to the bright light of historical fact.
Look, it makes for an amazing story. It's the kind of drama Bram Stoker would absolutely love. But the Bisley Boy theory collapses almost instantly when you apply just a little bit of actual historical scrutiny. Let's just start with a single number, 7. By the time she was only 11 years old, the real Princess Elizabeth could speak and write fluently in at least 7 languages, including Latin and Greek. The idea that some uneducated village boy could just get swapped in and convincingly fake that level of education and sheer genius for his entire life, fooling a whole court of scholars, it's unbelievable. And that heavy makeup? It wasn't hiding a beard. We know, for a fact, that as a young woman, Elizabeth survived a really nasty case of smallpox, and it left her with facial scars. That thick, white, lead-based makeup was simply what aristocrats did at the time to look flawless. But honestly, the biggest, most gaping hole in the theory is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what royal life was like. The whole myth needs privacy to work, but a Tudor monarch had absolutely zero privacy. They were public figures in the most literal sense you can imagine.
She was never alone. She had dozens of ladies-in-waiting who dressed her, bathed her every single day. Foreign ambassadors were obsessed with whether or not she could have children. Get this, in one insane example, a spy working for the King of Spain literally bribed Elizabeth's laundress just to get confirmation that she was still menstruating. That's how high the stakes were. A secret this big wasn't just unlikely, it was completely impossible to keep. So if the evidence is so paper-thin, why on earth has this story stuck around for so long? Well, the answer tells us very little about Queen Elizabeth and a whole lot about the world she had to conquer.
You really have to put yourself back in that time. Elizabethan society was deeply, profoundly patriarchal. Men held all the power, period. Women were legally and socially seen as the weaker sex, totally unfit for things like politics or leadership. Elizabeth becoming queen didn't magically change that worldview. She was just this shocking, unbelievable exception to the rule.
And this, right here, is the real heart of it. The theory stuck around because, for a lot of people, it was just easier to believe than the truth. The idea that a woman could be that successful, that intelligent, that powerful, for some it was way more believable to accept this outlandish conspiracy than to just accept that a woman could be that great.
So when you really break it down, the Bisley Boy conspiracy was never actually about a secret swap. It's a mirror. It reflects the society's deep-seated anxiety and inability to accept a brilliant, powerful woman succeeding entirely on her own terms.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Maybe the real conspiracy, the event that truly broke the rules and shocked the system, wasn't a secret boy in a dress. Maybe it was the simple, undeniable fact that a woman, ruling all by herself, could become one of the greatest and most powerful monarchs in history. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.